Welcome back to the Buddhist Bookshelf YouTube channel. In today's reading, we continue our journey through the Sorrowless Flower, a profound work penned by Ngoc Tran, also known by the Dharma name Thien Phuc. This marks our 38th episode in this enlightening series. 512. Dedication reaching all places. According to the Flower Adornment Sutra, Chapter 25, 10 Dedications, this is the fourth dedication of the 10 dedications, the dedication reaching all places of great enlightening beings. First, when enlightening beings cultivate all roots of goodness, they think, may the power of virtue of these roots of goodness reach all places. Just as reality extends everywhere without exception, reaching all things, reaching all worlds, reaching all beings, reaching all lands, reaching all phenomena, reaching all space, reaching all time, reaching all that is compounded and uncompounded, reaching all speech and sound. Second, when enlightening beings cultivate all roots of goodness, they think that these roots of goodness reach the abodes of all enlightened ones, be as offerings to all those Buddhas, the past Buddhas whose vows are fulfilled, the future Buddhas who are fully adorned, the present Buddhas, their lands, sites of enlightenment, and congregations, filling all realms throughout the entirety of space. Third, enlightening beings also aspire to present to all Buddhas offerings like those of the celestials, by virtue of the power of faith, by virtue of great knowledge without obstruction, by virtue of dedication of all roots of goodness. Fourth, when cultivating dedication reaching all places, great enlightening beings think to the Buddhas pervade all realms in space, and various actions produced in the worlds of all the unspeakably many world systems in the 10 directions, in unspeakably many Buddha lands, in unspeakably many Buddha spheres, in all kinds of worlds, in infinite worlds, in worlds without boundaries, in rotating worlds, in sideways worlds, in worlds facing downward and upward, in all worlds such as these, all Buddhas manifest a span of life and display various spiritual powers and demonstrations. In these worlds there are enlightening beings who, by the power of resolution for the sake of sentient beings who can be taught, they appear as Buddhas in all worlds, and reveal everywhere the boundless freedom and spiritual power of the enlightened, the body of reality extending everywhere without distinction, equally entering all realms of phenomena and principles. The body of inherent Buddhahood neither born nor perishing, but they utilize skillful expedients appearing throughout the world, because of realizing the true nature of things, transcending all bows of attainment of non-regressing power, because of birth among the people of vast power of unobstructed vision of the enlightened. 513. Periods of Sakyamuni's teachings. When the Buddha taught the reality of the skandhas and elements, but denied the common belief in real personality, though as a permanent soul. This period is represented by the four agamas, aham, and other Hinayana sutras. When the Buddha negated the idea of the reality of things, though and advocate that all was unreal. This period is represented by Prajna Sutras, bought now. When the Buddha taught, the mind or spirit is real, while things are unreal. This period is represented by the Wonder Lotus Sutras. The San Lun school divided the Buddha's sacred teaching into 3 wheels of the law, Dharma Chakra. First, the root wheel is the Avatamsaka, wreath. Second, the branch wheel is all Hinayana and Mahayana texts. Third, the wheel that contracts all the branches so as to bring them back to the root, i.e., the lotus. According to the original Buddhist tradition in China, there are 3 Dharma Chakra. First, the Tripitaka doctrine, the orthodox of Hinayana. The Pitaka, i.e. Tripitaka school, one of the 4 divisions of the Thien Phuc. It is the Hinayana school of the Sravaka and Pratika Buddha types, based on the Tripitaka and its 4 dogmas, with the Bodhisattva doctrine as an unimportant side issue. It is also divided into 4 others. The reality of things, the unreality of things, both the reality and the unreality of things, neither the reality nor the unreality of things. Second, the intermediate or interrelated doctrine, Hinayana cum Mahayana. The second stage in the Thien Phuc 4 periods of teaching, which held the doctrine of void but had not arrived at the doctrine of the mean. Third, the differentiated or separated doctrine. Early Mahayana is a culture development, as distinct from Hinayana. The different teaching of the Avatamsaka sect and Lotus sect is founded on one vehicle, the Buddha vehicle. The Lotus school asserts that the three vehicles are really the one vehicle, the Huayan school that the one vehicle differs from the three vehicles, hence the Lotus school is called the unitary, while the Huayan school is the differentiating school. The Thien Phuc school divided the Buddha's teachings into 4 periods. The first period is the Tripitaka teaching, or the Pitaka school was that of Hinayana. The second period is the interrelated teaching, or intermediate school, was the first stage of Mahayana, having in it elements of all the three vehicles, Sarabhaka, Pratyekabuddha, and Bodhisattva. Its developing doctrine linked it with Hinayana on the one hand and on the other hand, with the 2 further developments of the separate or differentiated Mahayana teaching and perfect teaching. The third period is the differentiated teaching. The different teaching of the Avatamsaka sect and Lotus sect is founded on one vehicle, the Buddha vehicle. The Lotus school asserts that the three vehicles are really the one vehicle, the Huayan school that the one vehicle differs from the three vehicles, hence the Lotus school is called the unitary, while the Huayan school is the differentiating school. The fifth period is the complete, perfect, or final teaching, a name for the esoteric teachings. In the centuries that followed the Buddha's death, various attempts were made to organize and formulate his teachings. Different systems appeared, basing themselves on the recorded scriptures, each purporting to express the Buddha's intended meaning from the time of his enlightenment until his nirvana. The reason of his teachings of different sutras is for the benefits of many different living beings, but the purpose of his doctrine was always the same. The Buddha's first preaching, fresh milk. This period is called Avatamsaka, Hoangiyam, for Sravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. This period is divided into 3 divisions each of 7 days after his enlightenment, when he preached the content of the Avatamsaka Sutra. According to the Thien Phuc sect, the Avatamsaka Sutra was delivered by Sakyamuni Buddha immediately after his enlightenment. However, this is questionable because the Huayan Sutra is a Mahayana creation. The second period is the Agamas or the coagulated milk for the Hinayana. The 12 years of the Buddha's preaching of Agamas in the Deer Park. The third period is the Vipulyas or the Vipulya period for the Mahayana. The 8 years of preaching Mahayana cum Hinayana doctrines. The fourth period is the Prajna or the Gola or butter for the Mahayana. 22 years of his preaching the Prajna or Wisdom Sutra. The fifth period is the Lotus and Nirvana, or the Sarpamanda or clarified butter for the Mahayana. The 8 years of his preaching of Lotus Sutra, and in a day and a night, the Nirvana Sutra. The Huayan sect divided the Buddha's teachings into 5 parts or the 5 divisions of Buddhism. There are 2 groups. The first group is from Tu Shun down to Xian Shu, and the second group is from Kue Feng. The first period of the Buddha's teachings, the doctrine of the small vehicle or Hinayana, Theravada. The Hinayana corresponds to the Agama Sutras, which interpret that the self is without substance, the separate elements or dharmas are real, and nirvana is their total annihilation. This doctrine refers to the teaching of the 4 Agamas. Although they deny the existence of the personal self, Pajala Sunyata, they are realistic and admit the existence of all separate elements, Dharma. They hold that nirvana is total extinction, and yet they do not understand much of the unreality of all elements, Dharma Sunyata. As to the causation theory, they attribute it to action influence. The second period of the Buddha's teachings, the elementary doctrine of the great vehicle, Mahayana. The primary or elementary stage of Mahayana is divided into many sections. Since neither admits the existence of the Buddha nature, Buddha Svabhava, in all beings, both are considered to be elementary. The first branch is the elementary doctrine which based on the specific character of all elements, Dharma Laksana, e.g., the idealistic school or Dharma Laksana. Realistic Mahayana which analyzes the specific and distinct character of the dharmas, found in the Yogacara Sutras. Second, the Dharmalaksana school which sets forth the theory of causation by ideation alaya vijnana, on the basis of phenomenal characteristics, laksana, and does not recognize the unity of fact and principle. Also, since it maintains the basic distinction of 5 species of men, it does not admit that all men can attain Buddhahood. The third branch, the elementary doctrine which based on negation of all elements or dharma sunyata, e.g., San Lun school. This is the idealistic Mahayana that holds all dharmas are non-substantial, found in Prajna or Wisdom Sutras. The fourth branch, the San Lun, which holds the one-sided view of void on the basis of own nature or no abiding nature, but admitting the unity of being and non-being, it affirms that men of the 3 vehicles and the 5 species are all able to attain Buddhahood. The third period of the Buddha's teachings, the final Mahayana teaching, or the Mahayana in its final stage, which teaches the Buddhatattva and universal Buddhahood, or the essentially true nature of all things and the ability of all beings to attain Buddhahood. This is the final metaphysical concepts of Mahayana, as presented in the Lankavatara Sutra, the Mahaparinirvana text, and the Awakening of Faith, etc. This doctrine asserts that all living beings have Buddha nature and can attain Buddhahood. The Thien Phuc school adheres to this doctrine. By this teaching, the ultimate truth of Mahayana is expounded. Therefore, it is called the doctrine of maturity. As it agrees with reality, it also called the true doctrine. In the elementary doctrine, fact and principle were always separate, while in this final doctrine, fact is always identified with principle, or in short, the two are one. The causation theory by matrix of the Thuscum is special to this doctrine. It is also called the theory of causation by thusness or tathata. The fourth period of the Buddha's teachings, the abrupt doctrine of the great vehicle. This means the training without word or order, directly appealing to one's own insight. This teaching emphasized on one's own insight by which one can attain enlightenment all at once. All words and speech will stop at once. Reason will present itself in its purity, and action will always comply with wisdom and knowledge. The Mahayana immediate, abrupt, direct, sudden, or intuitive school, by right concentration of thought, or faith, apart from good works, deeds. This teaching expounds the abrupt realization of the ultimate truth without relying upon verbal explanations or progression through various stages of practice, found in Vimalakirti Sutra. This doctrine holds that if thought ceases to arise in one's mind, the man is a Buddha. Such an attainment may be gained through silence as shown by Vimalakirti, a saintly layman in Vaisali, or through meditation as in the case of Bodhidharma, the founder of Chinese Chan school. The fifth period of the Buddha's teachings, the round doctrine of the great vehicle or the perfect teaching, expounds the one vehicle, or the Buddha vehicle. The complete or perfect teaching of the Huayan, combining the rest into one all-embracing vehicle, found in the Avatamsaka and Lotus Sutras. There are 2 grades of the round or perfect doctrine, one of which is the vehicle of the identical doctrine, not the Anong Jiao, in which the one vehicle is taught an identical or similar method with the other 3 vehicles. The one vehicle of the Avatamsaka school is inclusive of all vehicles. However, for the convenience, the 3 vehicles are taught to prepare the aspirants. The 3 flow out of the one vehicle and are taught in the identical method as the one. These vehicles recognized by the Avatamsaka school. Hinayana. The gradual Mahayana, the elementary Mahayana, the final Mahayana, and the abrupt doctrine of the great vehicle. Next, the one vehicle of the distinct doctrine, in which the one vehicle is set forth entirely distinct or independent from the other vehicles, as in the case of the teaching of the Avatamsaka school, in which the doctrine of the world of totalistic harmony mutually relating and penetrating is set forth. The one vehicle is higher than the other 3. The one vehicle is real, while the 3 are considered as temporary. While according to Kue Feng, he divided the Buddha's teachings into 5 periods, which were totally different from which of Tu Shun. The first period of the Buddha's teachings, the rebirth as human beings for those who keep the 5 commandments, and as devas for those who keep the 10 commandments. The second period of the Buddha's teachings, the doctrine of the small vehicle or Hinayana. The third period of the Buddha's teachings, the elementary doctrine of the great vehicle, Mahayana, based on the specific character of all elements, Dharma Laksana. The fourth period of the Buddha's teachings, the elementary doctrine of the great vehicle, Mahayana, based on negation of all elements or Dharma sunyata. The fifth period of the Buddha's teachings, the one vehicle which reveals the universal Buddha nature. It includes the Mahayana in its final stage, the immediate and the complete or perfect teaching of the Huayan. 514. Vehicles in Buddhism. The word vehicle symbolizes carrying and transporting sentient beings to enlightenment. 3 yanas are only expedient means that Buddha had taught based on the capacity of his disciples or hearers. Yana means a vehicle or a ferry boat of any kind that can be used to transport people or things. Vehicle literally means a means of transportation, but figuratively it is a means of expressing thoughts. Wain, any means of conveyance, a term applied to Buddhism as carrying men to salvation. The term yana was developed in Hinayana Buddhism. Yana means a vehicle in which the practitioner travels on the way to enlightenment. According to the Lotus Sutra, there are 3 vehicles or conveyances, or 3 divisions of Buddha's teachings, which carry living beings across samsara or mortality, births and deaths. They are Hira yana, Pratika Buddha yana, and Bodhisattva yana. In Buddhism, vehicle is only a means of progress used for spiritual development. The concept, already developed in the Hinayana Buddhism, the vehicle on which the cultivator, practitioner, travels on the way to enlightenment. Yana or vehicle is a path to salvation, which encompasses a particular system of doctrines and practices. The Buddhist doctrine that carries one from this side of birth and death to the other side of nirvana has been compared to a vehicle of conveyance since the early days of Buddhism. Vehicle or means of progress used for spiritual development. The concept already developed in the Hinayana Buddhism. The vehicle on which the cultivator, practitioner, travels on the way to enlightenment. Yana or vehicle is a path to salvation, which encompasses a particular system of doctrines and practices. The Buddhist doctrine that carries one from this side of birth and death to the other side of nirvana has been compared to a vehicle of conveyance since the early days of Buddhism. The word vehicle symbolizes carrying and transporting sentient beings to enlightenment. 3 yanas are only expedient means that Buddha had taught based on the capacity of his disciples or hearers. First of all, we should talk about the one vehicle or Buddhayana, the one teaching that leads to supreme enlightenment and the attainment of Buddhahood. An idea found in a number of Mahayana texts, such as the Lotus Sutra, which holds that the 3 approaches to liberation believe in Mahayana literature to have been taught by the Buddha: the hearer vehicle, Sarvakayana, the solitary realizer vehicle, Pratika Buddhayana, and the Bodhisattva vehicle, Bodhisattvayana, all converge into the one Buddha vehicle, Buddhayana. This is really the same as the Bodhisattva vehicle, which culminates in Buddhahood. The other 2 vehicles are said to be merely expedient teachings for those who would initially be afraid of or uninterested in the path of the Bodhisattva. In Buddhism, the one vehicle, Mahayana and Ekayana, are used synonymously in all the Mahayana texts. The idea of considering the Buddha's teaching as an instrument of conveyance was doubtless suggested by that of crossing the stream of samsara and reaching the other side of nirvana. In the Lankavatara Sutra, when Mahamati asked the Buddha the reason why he did not speak of the vehicle of oneness, the Buddha said, "There is no truth of parinirvana to be realized by the Sravakas and Pratika Buddhas all by themselves, therefore, I do not preach them the vehicle of oneness. Their emancipation is made possible only by means of the Tathagata's guidance, discretion, discipline, and direction. It does not take place by them alone. They have not yet made themselves free from the hindrance of knowledge, jnayavarana, and the working of memory. They have not yet realized the truth that there is no self-substance in anything, nor have they attained the inconceivable transformation death, as in Parinamasuti. For these reasons I do not preach the vehicle of oneness. I will only preach the Ekayana to the Sravakas when their evil habit of memory is all purgated, when they have an insight into the nature of all things that have no self-substance, and when they are awakened from the intoxicating result of samadhi, which comes from the evil habit of memory. They rise from the state of non-outflowings. When they are thus awakened, they will supply themselves with all the moral provisions on a plane which surpasses the state of non-outflowings where they have hitherto remained. The Buddha is often compared to a great physician who can cure every sort of illness by skillful treatment. As far as the science of medicine goes, there is just one principle which, however, in the hands of an experienced doctor, finds a variety of applications. The teaching of the Buddha does not vary in time and space, it has a universal application, but as its recipients differ in disposition and training and heredity, they variously understand it and are thereby cured each of his own spiritual illness. This one principle, universally and infinitely applicable, is known as one vehicle or great vehicle. In the Lankavatara Sutra, the Buddha taught, "My teaching is not divided, it remains always one and the same, but because of the desires and faculties of beings that are infinitely varied, it is capable also of infinite variation. There is one vehicle only, and refreshing is the eightfold path of righteousness." The way to realize the path of the Ekayana is to understand that the process of perception is due to discrimination. When this discrimination no longer takes place, and when one abides in the suchness of things, there is the realization of the vehicle of oneness. This vehicle has never been realized by anybody, not by the Sravakas, not by the Pratika Buddhas, nor by the Brahmins, except by the Buddha himself. Besides this Ekayana and Vijnana, the Mahayana Sutras generally speaks of Triyana, which consists of the Sravakayana, Pratika Buddhayana, and Bodhisattvayana. But we must remember that the Ekayana has really nothing to do with the number of yanas, though Eka means one. Eka in this case rather means oneness, and Ekayana is the designation of the doctrine teaching the transcendental oneness of things, by which all beings, including the Hinayanists and Mahayanists, are saved from the bondage of existence. In the Lankavatara Sutra, the Buddha said, "I preach the triple vehicle, the one vehicle, and no vehicle, but they are all meant for the ignorant, the little-witted, and for the wise who are addicted to the enjoyment of quietude. The gate of the ultimate truth is beyond the dualism of cognition. As long as mind evolves, these vehicles cannot be done away with. When it experiences a revulsion, paravritti, there is neither vehicle nor driver. The two vehicles are two methods that convey sentient beings to the final goal. These are the first two of the four big vehicles in Buddhism, which are namely Sravakas, Sravakahood, and Pratika Buddhas, Pratyekabuddhahood. The other two are supreme vehicles of Bodhisattvas and Buddhas. According to the Mahayana, the two vehicles are those of the Sravaskas and Pratika Buddhas. Together they constitute what is called Theravada or Southern Buddhism. According to the Lotus Sutra, Sravakas, Thien Phuc, and Pratikas also become Buddhas. The two vehicles of three and one, the three being the pre-lotus ideas of Sravaka, Pratika and Bodhisattva, the one being the doctrine of the Lotus Sutra, which combined all three in one. According to the Lotus Sutra, there are three vehicles or conveyances, or three divisions of Buddha's teachings, which carry living beings across samsara or mortality, births and deaths. They are Hirayana, Pratika Buddhayana, and Bodhisattvayana. The word vehicle symbolizes carrying and transporting sentient beings to enlightenment. Three yanas are only expedient means that Buddha had taught based on the capacity of his disciples or hearers. In reality, there is only one vehicle, that is the Buddha vehicle or the vehicle that leads to the Buddhahood. First, the Sravakayana or Theravada. Sravaka, hearer or obedient disciple, that of enlightened for self, the objective is personal salvation. Sravaka who understands, practices, and relies on the Four Noble Truths, philosophies, to become an erudite. Some people call Hirayana a lesser vehicle because hearers cultivate to enlighten themselves, not to help others enlighten. Second, Pratyekabuddhayana. The Pratika Buddha, that of enlightened for self, the objective is personal salvation. Pratyekabuddha who rightly understands, practices and relies on the theory of dependent origination, the 12-fold chain of cause and effect, to become a Pratyekabuddha. Some people call Pratika Buddha a lesser vehicle because Pratika Buddhas cultivate to enlighten themselves, not to help others enlighten. Third, Bodhisattvayana or Mahayana. A bodhisattva, leading after countless ages of self-sacrifice and saving others and progressive enlightenment to ultimate Buddhahood. A bodhisattva relies on the 6 paramitas, the 6 accomplishments. Bodhisattvayana is also called Mahayana, which means greater vehicle because bodhisattvas cultivate first to enlighten self and then enlighten others. Despite this, it is important for sincere Buddhists who practice Mahayana Buddhism not to look down on those who practice Hinayana Buddhism, since the ultimate goal of every Buddhist is to reach enlightenment, not to distinguish between Hinayana and Mahayana. There are also 4 vehicles. According to the Dharma Jewel Platform Sutra, Chapter 7, one day Chichang asked the Master, the Buddha taught the Dharma of the 3 vehicles, and also the supreme vehicle. Your disciple has not yet understood that and would like to be instructed. The Master said, contemplate only your own original mind, and do not be attached to the marks of external dharmas. The Dharma doesn't have 4 vehicles, it is people's minds that differ. The Master added, vehicles are methods of practice, not subjects for debate. Cultivate on your own and do not ask me, for at all times your own self-nature is itself thus. First, cultivating by seeing, hearing, and reciting is the small vehicle. Second, cultivating by awakening to the Dharma and understanding the meaning is the middle vehicle. Third, cultivating in accord with Dharma is the great vehicle. Fourth, penetrating the 10,000 dharmas entirely and completely while remaining without defilement, and to sever attachment to the marks of all the dharmas, with nothing whatsoever gained in return. That is the supreme vehicle. According to Buddhist traditions, 3 are also 5 vehicles. The 5 vehicles conveying to the karma reward which differs according to the vehicle. They are summed up as: according to the Mahayana's point of view, the 5 vehicles include the Narayana, the Devayana, the Sravakayanam, the Pratikabhidhanam, and the Bodhisattvayanam. The first vehicle is the Narayana. Rebirth among men conveyed by observing the 5 commandments, Panca Varamani. The second vehicle is the Devayana. Rebirth among the Devas by observing the 10 forms of good actions or 10 commandments, Dasa Kusala. The third vehicle is the Sravakayanam. Rebirth among the Sravakas by observing the 4 noble truths, Kadvari Arya Satyani. The fourth vehicle is the Pratikabhidhanam. Rebirth among Pratika Buddhas and Bodhisattvas by observing the 12 Nidanas, Dvadasanga Pratyasamatpada. The fifth vehicle is the Bodhisattvayanam. Among the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas by the 6 paramitas, Staparamita. However, according to the Hinayana's point of view, the 5 vehicles include sentient beings of desire realm, the gods of the Brahma heavens, the Pratika Buddhas, the Sravakas, and the Buddhas. According to the esoteric cult's point of view, 5 vehicles include men, corresponding with earth, Devas, corresponding with water, Sravakas, corresponding with fire, Pratika Buddhas, corresponding with wind, and Bodhisattvas, corresponding with the void. 515. Vehicle of oneness. The one vehicle. Mahayana and Ekayana are used synonymously in all the Mahayana texts. The idea of considering the Buddha's teaching as an instrument of conveyance was doubtless suggested by that of crossing the stream of samsara and reaching the other side of nirvana. In the Lankavatara Sutra, when Mahamati asked the Buddha the reason why he did not speak of the vehicle of oneness, the Buddha said, "There is no truth of parinirvana to be realized by the Sravakas and Pratika Buddhas all by themselves, therefore, I do not preach them the vehicle of oneness. Their emancipation is made possible only by means of the Tathagata's guidance, discretion, discipline, and direction. It does not take place by them alone. They have not yet made themselves free from the hindrance of knowledge, jnayavarana, and the working of memory. They have not yet realized the truth that there is no self-substance in anything, nor have they attained the inconceivable transformation death, as in Parinamasuti. For these reasons I do not preach the vehicle of oneness. I will only preach the Ekayana to the Sravakas, when their evil habit of memory is all purgated, when they have an insight into the nature of all things that have no self-substance, and when they are awakened from the intoxicating result of samadhi, which comes from the evil habit of memory. They rise from the state of non-outflowings. When they are thus awakened, they will supply themselves with all the moral provisions on a plane which surpasses the state of non-outflowings where they have hitherto remained. The Buddha is often compared to a great physician who can cure every sort of illness by skillful treatment. As far as the science of medicine goes, there is just one principle which, however, in the hands of an experienced doctor, finds a variety of applications. The teaching of the Buddha does not vary in time and space, it has a universal application, but as its recipients differ in disposition and training and heredity, they variously understand it and are thereby cured each of his own spiritual illness. This one principle, universally and infinitely applicable, is known as one vehicle or great vehicle. In the Lankavatara Sutra, the Buddha taught, "My teaching is not divided, it remains always one and the same, but because of the desires and faculties of beings that are infinitely varied, it is capable also of infinite variation. There is one vehicle only, and refreshing is the eightfold path of righteousness." Besides this Ekayana and Vijnana, the Mahayana Sutras generally speaks of Triyana, which consists of the Sravakayana, Pratyeka-Buddhayana, and Bodhisattvayana. But we must remember that the Ekayana has really nothing to do with the number of yanas, though Eka means one. Eka in this case rather means oneness, and Ekayana is the designation of the doctrine teaching the transcendental oneness of things, by which all beings, including the Hinayanists and Mahayanists, are saved from the bondage of existence. In the Lankavatara Sutra, the Buddha said, "I preach the triple vehicle, the one vehicle, and no vehicle, but they are all meant for the ignorant, the little-witted, and for the wise who are addicted to the enjoyment of quietude. The gate of the ultimate truth is beyond the dualism of cognition. As long as mind evolves, these vehicles cannot be done away with. When it experiences a revulsion, paravritti, there is neither vehicle nor driver. As a matter of fact, there is in reality only one vehicle, which is the Supreme Buddha vehicle. This is the only one path that is conducive to the final goal of Buddhahood, not two, not three, if any, they are beings of severally different modes of conduct. Just as the Buddha is infinitely superior to the Arhat and the Pratyeka Buddha. According to Buddhism, we all want to diligently cultivate to aim at the one vehicle to perfect Buddhahood. If we diligently cultivate, eventually we all will become Buddhas, and the doctrine of the three vehicles was in fact nothing more than the Buddha's skillful means to save a varieties of beings. The way to realize the path of the Ekayana is to understand that the process of perception is due to discrimination. When this discrimination no longer takes place, and when one abides in the suchness of things, there is the realization of the vehicle of oneness. This vehicle has never been realized by anybody, not by the Sravakas, not by the Pratyeka Buddhas, nor by the Brahmins, except by the Buddha himself. 516. Two vehicles. Two vehicles conveying to the final goal. Mahayana and Hinayana. The two vehicles include Sravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. These are the first two of the four big vehicles in Buddhism, which are namely Sravakas, Sravakahood, and Pratyeka Buddhas, Pratyeka Buddhahood. The other two are supreme vehicles of Bodhisattvas and Buddhas. According to the Mahayana, the two vehicles are those of the Sravaskas and Pratyeka Buddhas. Together they constitute what is called Theravada or Southern Buddhism. 3 ranks of the two vehicles before the Buddha preached the Lotus Sutra: Sravaka, Pratyeka and Bodhisattva. According to the Lotus Sutra, Sravakas, Thien, and Pratyekas also become Buddhas. The two vehicles of 3 and 1, the 3 being the pre-lotus ideas of Sravaka, Pratyeka and Bodhisattva, the 1 being the doctrine of the Lotus Sutra, which combined all 3 in 1. 517. 3 vehicles. According to the Lotus Sutra, there are 3 vehicles or conveyances, or 3 divisions of Buddha's teachings, which carry living beings across samsara or mortality, births and deaths. They are Hirayana, Pratyeka Buddhayana, and Bodhisattvayana. The word vehicle symbolizes carrying and transporting sentient beings to enlightenment. 3 yanas are only expedient means that Buddha had taught based on the capacity of his disciples or hearers. However, for preaching the Triyana, the Buddha told Sariputra thus: Sariputra, I know that sentient beings have various desires and objects to which their thoughts are profoundly attached. Following their basic natures, by resort to the expedient power of various means, parables and phrases, I preach the Dharma to them. Sariputra, I do this only in order that they may gain the one Buddha vehicle and knowledge of all modes. Sariputra, in the worlds of the 10 directions there are not even 2 vehicles. How can we talk about 3? First, the Sravakayana or Theravada. Sravaka, hearer or obedient disciple, that of enlightened for self, the objective is personal salvation. Sravaka who understands, practices, and relies on the 4 noble truths, philosophies, to become an erudite. Some people call hearer yana a lesser vehicle because hearers cultivate to enlighten themselves, not to help others enlighten. Second, the Pratyekabuddhayana. Pratyeka Buddha, that of enlightened for self, the objective is personal salvation. Pratyekabuddha who rightly understands, practices and relies on the theory of dependent origination, the 12-fold chain of cause and effect, to become a Pratyekabuddha. Some people call Pratyeka Buddha a lesser vehicle because Pratyeka Buddhas cultivate to enlighten themselves, not to help others enlighten. Third, the Bodhisattvayana or Mahayana. A bodhisattva, leading after countless ages of self-sacrifice and saving others and progressive enlightenment to ultimate Buddhahood. A bodhisattva relies on the 6 paramitas, the 6 accomplishments. Bodhisattvayana is also called Mahayana, which means greater vehicle because bodhisattvas cultivate first to enlighten self, and then enlighten others. Despite this, it is important for sincere Buddhists who practice Mahayana Buddhism not to look down on those who practice Hinayana Buddhism, since the ultimate goal of every Buddhist is to reach enlightenment, not to distinguish between Hinayana and Mahayana. 518. Hinayana. Minor vehicle means the southern or Theravada school. The smaller inferior vehicle is compared with the greater teaching, Nayadua. Hinayana is the form of Buddhism which developed after Sakyamuni's death, at about the beginning of the Christian era, when Mahayana doctrine were introduced. The objective is personal salvation. The term used by Mahayanists to describe their opponents who cultivate a doctrine different from Mahayana, or whose path is characterized as selfish and inferior, and only for their own benefits. A Sanskrit term for little or minor, small, vehicle. Name of the earliest system of Buddhist doctrine, opposed to the Mahayana. This is the term which the Mahayana utilizes to refer to those who follow Theravada, for they have own liberation goal, rather than that of all beings. In fact, Hinayana developed between the death of Buddha and the 1st century BC, and it represented the original and pure teaching as it was taught by the Buddha. The essence of the teaching is expressed in the 4 noble truths, the doctrine of dependent arising, the teaching of the ego, the law of karma, and the Eightfold Noble Path. Although according to Indian Buddhist legends, there were many Hinayana schools since early Buddhism, but only 18 were mentioned in the records. Although many of these schools developed their own Abhidharma and Vinayas, but they shared a great deal in common, particularly the 4 noble truths, the dependent arising, and the ideal of individual liberation. Today the only Hinayana school that survives is Theravada. However, they reject the label small vehicle. The goal of seeking for Buddhahood is Mahayana, but seeking for arhathood, Sravakas or Pratyeka Buddhahood are Hinayana. Nowadays, there exists only one school named Theravada. However, Buddhists in this school do not accept the label Hinayana given to them by the Mahayanists. The Buddha did not appoint a successor, and after his final extinction, Buddhism never again had a central authority. With the passage of time and the tradition's geographical expansion, it was inevitable that different visions of the Buddhist path developed. However, such divergences have never constituted a schism because varying views are, and always have been, permissible in Buddhism. Only by changing the rules of monastic practice, and thereby splitting the Sangha, would a schism be created. In the Pali Nikayas it is said that before his final extinction, the Buddha urged his followers to make themselves in the Dharma their only island and sole refuge. Accordingly, after his death the members of the Sangha gather in Rahagriha, present-day Rajur, to recite the Buddha's discourses. This event is referred to as the First Council. As the Sangha spread and Buddhist thought developed, it was inevitable that disputes would arise. By the time the Second Council was called at Vaisali, around 330 BC, there were many factions in the Sangha pulling in different directions. The most conservative form of Buddhism, the Theravada or teaching of the elders, is the dominant form practiced today in such places as Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. Theravadins emphasize the importance of the last historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, and claim to preserve his authentic teaching. This teaching is canonized as the Three Baskets, a group of texts dating probably from the 1st century BC and written in Pali, a Middle Indian language akin to the language the Buddha himself would have spoken. Classical Theravada recognizes that there are different goals for different followers. However, its ideal is the erudite, the disciple who gains enlightenment through meditation on the Buddha's Dharma and is released from the cycle of rebirth. The Buddha spoke to a wide range of people from every social, educational, and economic background. His followers varied in disposition, interest, and inclination. However, thus the Buddha taught according to the specific group present at each discourse, using words and concepts suitable for their different levels. The various teachings he gave developed into two principal traditions: the Theravada and the Mahayana. The Theravada contains the teachings spoken by the Buddha to people who were interested in being free from cyclic existence and attaining liberation. These sutras were passed down orally until the 1st century BC. When they were written down in Ceylon and became what is known now as the Pali Canon. The Theravada tradition was widely practiced in India after the Buddha's passing away. By the 3rd century BC, it was established in current-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, and took root in Central Asia in the early century AD. However, Muslim invasion in the 11th and 12th centuries virtually extinguished the religion in the Indian subcontinent and in Central Asia. In the 3rd century BC, King Asoka of India sent missionaries to Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, where Buddhism became firmly established. The Theravada tradition still flourishes there. From India and from Ceylon, it spread to Southeast Asia and is presently strong in Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, and Laos. In recent years, the Theravada tradition has become more widely practiced in Malaysia and Singapore. In the 19th century, Western intellectuals became interested in the Theravada tradition. Nowadays, it attracts people from all walks of life, and Theravada monasteries, Dharma centers, and retreat sites have been established throughout the West. Based on the Pali Canon, the Theravada tradition presents Buddha's teachings by first explaining the Four Noble Truths, the three higher trainings, and the Noble Eightfold Path. The Theravada tradition states that the number of people who can become Buddhas are very few. In our eon, there will be 1,000 Buddhas, of which Sakyamuni Buddha is the fourth. The 996 Buddhas to be are now Bodhisattvas. Thus, as the rest of us won't become Buddhas, we should aim to become arhats, those who are free from cyclic existence and have attained nirvana. In the West, Theravada practice is popular with people who wish to calm their uncontrolled thoughts and emotions and to focus on more positive attitudes. Many people in the business world have found breathing meditation extremely helpful, so many of them focus on meditation. And that's why there is a considerable difference between Sangha and lay people in their way of practicing the Dharma in Asian Theravada countries and Theravada traditions in the West. In Southeast Asian countries, the monks keep their precepts purely, study, meditate, and dedicate the positive potential they create for everyone's welfare. Because the Sangha's practice benefits society as a whole, the laity happily supply daily requisites: food, clothing, shelter, and medicine to the monks. This view of the roles of Sangha and lay is changing as the Theravada tradition takes root in the West. Most Western lay Buddhists are interested in meditation, and many meditate daily before and after going to work. They go to Dharma centers for their annual vacation. Some even take several months' leave from their job to participate in lengthy retreats. In the West, Dharma teachers can be both ordained and lay, men and women. There are some differences between Hinayana and Mahayana. The Mahayanists emphasize the universalism and altruism, develop wisdom and the perfect transformation of all living in the future state, while the Hinayanists seek for narrow personal salvation, seek for the destruction of body and mind, and extinction in nirvana. Bodhisattvas in the Mahayana practice 6 paramitas, While for the arahantship the Four Noble Truths are the foundation teaching, for pratika Buddhahood the 12 Nidanas. To seek for Buddhahood is Mahayana, to seek for arahanthood, Sravakas or pratika Buddhahood are Hinayana. The ideal of Hinayana was aratship or attainment of personal enlightenment. The ideal of Mahayana was Bodhisattvayana. Sravakayana and Pratyekabuddhayana, according to Mahayana, aimed at mere individual enlightenment, which was a narrow ideal. Bodhisattvayana aimed at universal enlightenment. It was the destiny of every individual to become a Buddha. The Bodhisattva ideal of Mahayana was higher, that of Hinayana was inferior. The difference in the spiritual ideal of the two is expressed in yet another way. The ideal of Hinayana is nirvana, the ideal of Mahayana is Bhadava, the attainment of Buddhahood. The Mahayanist does not consider the attainment of nirvana to be the highest ideal, but the attainment of Bhadava, i.e. prajna or transcendental insight and karuna or universal love to be the highest ideal. The Hinayanist believes that by the realization of not-self or unsubstantiality of the person, one could attain nirvana. The Mahayanist maintains that it is not only by the realization of not-self or unsubstantiality of the person, pijala naratmya, but by the realization that all dharmas or elements of existence are unsubstantial, devoid of any According to Mahayana, the realization of both pijala naratmya and dharmas naratmya is necessary for the attainment of nirvana. The Hinayanist says that man is unable to attain nirvana because reality is hidden by the veil of passion-like attachment, aversion, delusion. The delusion acts as an obstacle in the way of the realization of nirvana. The delusion has, therefore, to be removed before one can attain nirvana. The afflictions, however, depend for their activity on the belief of an identical person self. It is only by realizing the not-self or unsubstantiality of the person that the afflictions or the obstacles can nirvana be attained. The removal of delusion is thus connected with the realization of the not-self or unsubstantiality of the person. The Hinayanist considers the removal of delusion alone as sufficient for the attainment of nirvana. The Mahayanist says that reality is veiled not only by delusion, but also by the veil that hides true knowledge. The removal, therefore, of the veil that hides true knowledge is also necessary. This is possible by the realization of all dharmas or elements of existence are unsubstantial, devoid of any independent reality of their own, dharmas naratmya, or the egolessness emptiness of all elements of existence, dharmasanyata. Just as the removal of delusion is connected with the realization of the not-self or unsubstantiality of the person, so the removal of the veil that hides true knowledge, jnayavarana, is connected with the realization of all dharmas or elements of existence are unsubstantial, devoid of any independent reality of their own, dharmas naratmya. The Mahayanist maintains that the removal of delusion alone is not sufficient for the attainment of full freedom. The removal of the veil that hides true knowledge, jnayavarana, is also necessary. The Hinayanist believed in certain ultimate reals, called dharmas. The word dharma in this sense is difficult to translate. It is sometimes translated as things. It should be borne in mind that dharmas are not things in the sense of the common sense. Elements of existence, ultimate reals, these are better translations of dharmas. Hinayana believes that the world is compassed of an unceasing flow of certain ultimate dharmas, which are simple, momentary and impersonal. Most of them are dharmas with signs, samskara, and some are dharmas without signs, asamskara. According to Mahayana, these dharmas are not ultimate realities at all, but only mental constructs. Mahayana pointed out that even the so-called ultimate dharmas with signs and without signs are dependent upon conditions and so relative. Being relative, they are devoid of reality, sunya. Hinayana was intellectual, Mahayana devotional. Also Hinayana was entirely intellectual. The main concern of the Hinayana was to follow the Eightfold Path taught by the Buddha. In Hinayana, it was the human aspect of the Buddha which was emphasized. In Mahayana, Buddha was taken as supreme reality itself that descended on earth in human form for the good of mankind. The concept of supreme reality in Buddhism was never as a creator, but as divine love that out of compassion embodied itself in human form to uplift suffering humanity. He was worshipped with fervent devotion. The devotion of the Mahayanist gave rise to the art of sculpture and painting. Beautiful statues of Buddha were carved out, and excellent imaginative pictures representing him and the various aspects of his life were painted. Mahayana maintained that the arduous path of transcendental wisdom, prajna, was meant only for the advanced few. For the average man it was devotion to the Buddha, which would enable him to attain nirvana. Buddha was worshipped in the form of Avalokitesvara, medicine Buddha, Amitabha and the future Buddha, Maitreya. The theories of Hinayana emphasize on the three characteristic marks, which are also called the three characteristic marks of all Hinayana sutras: impermanence of phenomena, the unreality of the ego, and nirvana. There are four schools or doctrines of Hinayana: the door of reality, the existence of all phenomena, the doctrine of being, the door of unreality, door of non-existence, the door of both reality and unreality or relativity of existence and non-existence, and the door of neither, or transcending existence or non-existence. The Hinayana has 9 classes of work, which includes the whole of the 12 classes of the Mahayana less, minus, the Udana or voluntary discourses, the Vipulya or broader teaching, and the Vyakarana or prophecies. Hinayanists believe that many new Mahayana sutras are not the Buddha's actual words. In fact, they reject these works because they believe that these works are only concoctions and worthless of serious consideration. As for the commandments of Hinayana, also recognized by the Mahayana, 5 and 8 commandments for laymen, 10 commandments for the novice, 227 commandments for the monks, and 348 commandments for the nuns. The Hinayana philosophy is based on the Four Noble Truths. As for the sutras, the Hinayana has 4 sections of Agama sutras: Dirghagamas, long work scriptures, cosmological, 22 books; Madhyamagamas, middle work, metaphysical, 60 books; Samyuktagama, general on dhyana, trance, etc., 50 books; and the Ekadarikagamas, numerical arranged subjects, 51 books. According to Keith in the Dictionary of Chinese Buddhist Terms, the Hinayana Sastras, the philosophical canon of the Hinayana, now supposed consist of some 37 works, the earliest of which is said to be the Gunanadisa Sastra of before 220 AD. The date of the Abhidharma is still unknown to us. Zen of small vehicle. This is the vehicle or teaching that is to take you from one state of mind to another state of mind, i.e. from delusion to enlightenment. However, Zen of the small vehicle looks only into one's own peace of mind. The purpose of Zen of small vehicle is to attain one of the 4 degrees of saintliness of Hinayana. According to Buddhist history, at the beginning, the Hinayana had 2 major classes: Sthavaravadan and Mahasangika. Sthavaravadan is also called the school of presbyters. This division is reported to have taken place under the leadership of the monk named Mahadeva, 100 years after the Buddha's nirvana, and during the reign of Asoka. Mahadeva's sect became the Sarvastivadins. According to I Ching, there are 4 schools in Hinayana: Arya Mahasanganikaya, Arya Stavira, Arya Mulasarvastivada, and Arya Samatiya. There were 3 of the 18 Hinayana schools were transported to China: Kosa sect, Satya City, and Vinaya school or the school of Harithaman. Later, Hinayana was divided into 18 sects, Hinayana 18 sects: Mahasangika, Ekavya-Vaharika, Lokadaravadina, Bahusratiya, Prajantivadina, Jatavaniya, Katyasala, Aparasala, Uttarasala, Kakutika, Gokulika, Aryasthavira, Hemavada, Sarvastivada, Dharmadariya. The Thien Phuc school divided Sakyamuni's teaching into 8 divisions, from the Avatamsaka to the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras. The Tripitaka or Hinayana teaching for Sravakas and Pratyekabuddhas, the Bodhisattva doctrine being subordinate. It also included the primitive Sunyu doctrine as developed in the Satyasiddhi Sastra. First, the Tripitaka or Hinayana teaching for Sravakas and Pratyekabuddhas, the Bodhisattva doctrine being subordinate. It also included the primitive Sunyu doctrine as developed in the Satyasiddhi Sastra. Second, the immediate teaching which contained Hinayana and Mahayana doctrine for Sravakas, Pratyekabuddhas, and Bodhisattvas, to which are attributed the doctrine of Dharmalaksana or Yogacara and Madhyamaka schools. Third, the differential teachings. The Buddha's differential or separated, Bodhisattva teaching, definitely Mahayana. Fourth, the universal teaching. The Buddha's final, perfect bodhisattva, universal teaching is preached, i.e., the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras. 5th, direct teaching without reserve of the whole truth, i.e., the Avatamsaka Sutra. Nongyo. 6th, gradual or graded teaching, i.e., Agama and Nirvana Sutras. 7th, esoteric teaching, only understood by special members of the assembly. 8th, general or indeterminate teaching, from which each hearer would derive benefit according to his interpretation. 519. Middle vehicle. According to Buddhism, the middle vehicle is a way of giving up extremes, a way of the Noble Eightfold Path, a medial system between Hinayana and Mahayana. The middle vehicle to nirvana includes all intermediate or medial systems between Hinayana and Mahayana. It also corresponds with the state of a Pratyeka Buddha who lives chiefly for his own salvation but partly for others. Middle way philosophy, a term for the way of Sakyamuni Buddha, which teaches avoidance of all extremes, such as indulgence in the pleasures of the senses on one side and self-mortification and asceticism on the other. More specifically, it refers to the Madhyamaka, middle way, school founded by Nagarjuna, which refrains from choosing between opposing positions, and in relation to the existence and non-existence of all things, treads a middle way. The middle vehicle is the path of moderation, a righteous path of life which teaches people to keep away from bad deeds, to do good and to purify the mind. Shakyamuni Buddha discovered the middle path which advises people to. The middle way is the path taught by the Buddha, the path of moderation. We should recall that the life of the Buddha before his enlightenment falls into two distinct periods. The time before his renunciation was one in which he enjoyed every possible luxury. For example, his father built for him 3 palaces, one for each season, and provided him with sources of unimaginable pleasure in his day. Then, after his renunciation, he lived 6 years of extreme asceticism and self-mortification. He tormented his body through various practices like sleeping on beds of thorns and sitting in the midst of fires under the cruel heat of midday sun. Having experienced the extreme of luxury and deprivation, and having reached the limits of these extremes without any results, the Buddha discovered the middle way, which avoids both the extreme of indulgence in pleasures of the senses and the extremes of self-mortification. Madhyamaka philosophy was systematized by Nagarjuna, one of the greatest thinkers of India. According to the Madhyama, the Buddha followed a moderate path avoiding the two extremes, indulgence in sensual pleasures and the habitual practice of self-mortification. When an attempt was made to interpret and discover the import of that path, Nagarjuna came forward with his own interpretation and called it Madhyamaka, or moderate. The central idea in his philosophy is prajna wisdom or ultimate knowledge, derived from an understanding of the nature of things in their true perspective, sunyata. Sunyata for him is a synonym for dependent origination. So the dictum, everything is void, must be taken to mean that everything has a dependent origination and is hence non-substantial. Here everything stands for all things, Dharma internal and external. So everything for him is devoid of substantiality and becomes illusory. When this is realized, the Dharmadhatu or the monistic cosmic element becomes manifest. Another fundamental principle in his philosophy is ahadavata, the non-origination theory. Things declared non-substantial, sunya, also bring home to us by implication the idea that they are unoriginated and undestroyed. Nagarjuna takes great pains to expound the non-origination theory in his works, such as the Madhyamaka Sastra. His method of exposition and logic were so convincing that even those who belonged the opposite camp were tempted to adapt them to their own theories. To quote one example, Gaudapada, a great exponent of Advaitism, was influenced considerably by Nagarjuna's method of arguments. The external world, for both the Madhyamakas and Advaitins, is unreal. The arguments advanced by Nagarjuna were also adopted by Gaudapada insofar as they supported his propositions. The formulation of the non-origination theory by Nagarjuna is a logical corollary of his doctrine and relativity. The non-origination theory, as applied to the phenomenal world, was unknown in Advaitism before Gaudapada. The Upanishad speaks several times of the Atman and Brahman as unborn, imperishable and eternal, but nowhere do they speak thus of the external world. Nor do we find anybody before Gaudapada in the galaxy of Advaitins who pleaded for the non-origination of things in general as did Gaudapada in his Karikas. Therefore there is no denying the fact that Gaudapada must have taken the idea from Nagarjuna and adapted it suitably to provide the Advaita doctrine with a firm foundation. The doctrine of the middle path means in the first instance the middle path between the two extremes of optimism and pessimism. Such a middle position is a third extreme, tending neither one way nor the other is what the Buddha wanted to say. The Buddha certainly began with this middle as only one step higher than the ordinary extremes. A gradual ascent of the dialectical ladder, however, will bring us higher and higher until a stage is attained wherein the antithetic undecidedness of ends and non-ends is denied and transcended by an idealistic synthesis. In this case the middle path has a similar purport as the highest truth. In the first verse of the Mulamadhyamakarika, Nagarjuna stated, "No entity is produced at any time, anywhere, or in any manner from self, from other, from both, or without cause." This is the fundamental Madhyamaka critique of causality. This is also the refutal of the Madhyamaka on the four possibilities for the origination of phenomena, or the relationship between cause and effect of philosophical schools contemporary with the Madhyamaka. Madhyamaka's school utilized a method called reductio ad absurdum, or a negative dialectic that exposes the inherent contradictions and absurdities in the opponent's position. The Sankhya system, one of the classical systems of Indian philosophy, advocated the position that maintains that the cause and effect are identical. However, the Madhyamaka says that, if in fact cause and effect are identical, then having bought cottonseed with the price one would pay for cloth would be the same. The idea that cause and effect are identical thus leads to absurdity. If cause and effect were identical, then there would be no difference between father and son, and also no difference between food and excrement. The Hinayana schools of Buddhism, Vaibhashika, Sautrantika and some of the Brahmanical schools agreed that the position which cause and effect are different. However, the Madhyamaka says that, if in fact cause and effect are different, anything could originate from anything else, because all phenomena are equally different. Hence a stalk of rice might just as easily originate from a piece of coal as from a grain of rice, for there would be no connection between a stalk of rice and a grain of rice, and a piece of coal and a grain of rice would have the same relationship of difference to a stalk of rice. Thus the notion that cause and effect are absolutely different is an intrinsically absurd idea. The position according to which phenomena originated from causes that are both identical and different, cause and effect, are both identical and different, was affirmed by the Jaina philosophers. However, the Madhyamaka says that no phenomenon can have contradictory characteristics. An entity cannot be both existent and non-existent at the same time, just as one entity cannot be both red and not red at the same time. Thus there are no such phenomena that can be originated from cause and effect that are identical and different at the same time. Phenomena arise without cause or phenomena originate without a cause was affirmed by the materialists in ancient India. However, the Madhyamaka says that the idea that phenomena originate without a cause is nonsense by appeal to common experience. For instance, if we set a kettle of water on a lighted stove, the water will boil, but if we set it on a block of ice, it won't. So the position that maintains phenomena originate without a cause is impossible. The doctrine of Mahayana Sutras, and of the Prajnaparamita in particular, was developed in a systematic and philosophical form by the Madhyamakas. Madhyama means middle, and the Madhyamakas are those who take the middle way between affirming and denying. The school was founded, probably about 150 AD, by Nagarjuna and Aryadeva. Nagarjuna was one of the most subtle dialecticians of all times. Of Brahmin family, he came from Birur in South India and was active in Nagarjunakonda near Amaravati, in northern India. His name is explained by the legend that he was born under an Arjuna tree, and that Nagas, i.e. serpent kings or dragons, had instructed him in secret lore in the dragon's palace under the sea. His theory is called Sunyavada or emptiness doctrine. He supplemented with a logical apparatus the views expounded in the sutras on perfect wisdom, which he is said to have rescued from the netherworld of the Nagas. While Sakyamuni, so the story goes, taught to men the doctrine of the disciples, in heaven he taught at the same time a deeper doctrine, which was first preserved by the dragons, and then brought to earth by Nagarjuna. The Madhyamaka school flourished in India for well over 800 years. About 450 AD it split into two subdivisions. One side, the Prasanjikas, interpreted Nagarjuna's doctrine as a universal skepticism and claimed that their argumentations had the exclusive purpose of refuting the opinions of others. The other side, the Svatantrikas, maintained that argument could also establish some positive truths. Together with Buddhism, the Madhyamakas disappeared from India after 1000 AD. Their leading ideas have survived up to the present day in the Vedanta system of Hinduism, into which they were incorporated by Gaudapada and Sankara, its founders. Translations of the Prajnaparamita Sutras have exerted a profound influence in China from 180 AD onwards. The Madhyamakas existed for a few centuries, from 400 or 600 to 900, as a separate school called San Lun Tsung. In 625 the school came to Japan as Zanren, but it has been extinct there for a long time. Adapted to the Chinese and Japanese outlook on life, the doctrine lives on as Chan or Zen. The treatise on the Middle Way or the guidebook of the school of the Middle Way. The sastras stressed on the teaching of the Middle Way, the basic teaching of the Madhyamaka school of the Indian Mahayana Buddhism. The teaching of the Middle Way, presented and followed by the Madhyamakas, founded by Nagarjuna and Aryadeva in the 2nd century AD, which attained great influence in India, Tibet, China and Japan. One of the two Mahayana schools in India, together with the Yogacara. The basic statement of the doctrines of this school is found in Master Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka Karika. According to the Madhyamaka Sastra, the true meaning of emptiness, sunyata, is non-existence, or the non-substantiveness. The Madhyamaka Sastra, attributed to the Bodhisattva Nagarjuna as creator and Nilakasis as compiler, translated into Chinese by Kumarajiva in 409 AD. It is the principal work of the Madhyamaka or middle school. The teaching of this school opposes the rigid categories of existence and non-existence, and denies the two extremes of production or creation and non-production and other antitheses, in the interests of a middle or superior way. According to Nagarjuna, the middle way is true nature of all things which neither is born nor dies, and cannot be defined by either the two extremes, existence or non-existence. The first and principal work of the three main works of the middle school. Fortunately, the Sanskrit text of it has been preserved. It was translated into Chinese by Kumarajiva. It is a treatise of 400 verses in which Nagarjuna refutes certain wrong views of Mahayana or of general philosophers, thereby rejecting all realistic and pluralistic ideas, and indirectly establishing his monistic doctrine. The Madhyamaka system is neither skepticism nor agnosticism. It is an open invitation to everyone to see reality face to face. According to the Survey of Buddhism, Sangarakshita's summary of the Madhyamaka system as follows. Buddhism may be compared to a tree. Buddha's transcendental realization is the root. The basic Buddhism is the trunk, the distinctive Mahayana doctrines the branches, and the schools and sub-schools of the Mahayana the flowers. Now the function of flowers, however beautiful, is to produce fruit. Philosophy, to be more than barren speculation, must find its reason and its fulfillment in a way of life. Thought should lead to action. Doctrine gives birth to method. The Bodhisattva ideal is the perfectly ripened fruit of the whole vast tree of Buddhism. Just as the fruit encloses the seeds, so within the Bodhisattva ideal are recombined all the different and sometimes seemingly divergent elements of Mahayana. According to Jaydev Singh in an introduction to Madhyamaka philosophy, we have seen the main features of Madhyamaka philosophy. It is both philosophy and mysticism. By its dialectic, its critical probe into all the categories of thought, it relentlessly exposes the pretensions of reason to know truth. The hour of reason's despair, however, becomes the hour of truth. The seeker now turns to meditation on the various forms of sunyata and the practice of prajnaparamitas. By moral and yogic practices, he is prepared to receive the truth. In the final stage of prajna, the wheels of imagination are stopped, the discursive mind is stilled, and in that silence reality stoops to kiss the eye of the aspirant. He receives the accolade of prajna and becomes the niterant of truth. It is an experience of a different dimension, spaceless, timeless, which is beyond the province of thought and speech. Hence it cannot be expressed in any human language. According to Nagarjuna Bodhisattva in the Madhyamaka Sastra, the middle path of the twofold truth is expounded by the 5 terms. First, the one-sided worldly truth maintains the theory of the real production and the real extinction of the phenomenal world. Second, the one-sided higher truth adheres to the theory of the non-production and non-extinction of the phenomenal world. Third, the middle path of worldly truth. One sees that there is a temporary production and temporary extinction of phenomenon. Fourth, the middle path of the higher truth. One sees there is neither contemporary production nor contemporary extinction. Fifth, the middle path elucidated by the union of both popular and higher truths. One considers that there is neither production and extinction, nor non-production and non-extinction. In India, the Madhyamaka school or the Madhyamakas were so called on account of the emphasis they laid on the middle view, Madhyamaka Pradipit. In his first sermon at Banners, the Buddha preached the middle path, which is neither self-mortification nor a life devoted to the pleasures of the senses. However, the middle path, as advocated by the adherents of the Madhyamaka system, is not quite the same. Here, the middle path stands for the non-acceptance of the 2 views concerning existence and non-existence, eternity and non-eternity, self and non-self, and so on. In short, it advocates neither the theory of reality nor that of the unreality of the world, but merely of relativity. It is, however, to be noted that the middle path propounded at Banners has an ethical meaning, while that of the Madhyamakas is a metaphysical concept. The middle school of which doctrine was based on the 3 main works of Nagarjuna. The most striking feature of Madhyamaka philosophy is its ever-recurring use of sunya and sunyata. So this system is also known as the school with the philosophy that asserts sunya as the characterization of reality. Besides, there was a galaxy of Madhyamaka thinkers, such as Aryadeva in the 3rd century AD, Bidapalita in the 5th century, Bhavavavika in the 5th century, Chandrakirti in the 6th century, and Santideva in the 7th century. In China, the 3 Madhyamaka treatises is divided into 2 groups. The first tradition is called the Old, follows the tradition from Nagarjuna to Kumarajiva, and the second is called the New tradition from Kaitzang, 549 to 623 AD, a disciple of Kumarajiva, to the time of its decline in the 8th century AD. The San Lun Tsung was a Buddhist sect which expressed the Madhyamaka doctrine according to absolute truth, Paramartha Satya. These schools stress the doctrine of conventional truth, Samvati Satya, according to which all beings are conditioned and merely interrelated, but do not come into existence in the absolute sense. The practical aspect of the Madhyamaka philosophy was expressed by these schools in their approach to human life. Although these schools contributed to the cultural development of ancient China for 8 centuries, today they are only objects of historical, textual and philosophical study. They no longer exist as religious institutions in China, except in the modified form of Tibetan Lamaism. Chief texts which constitute the San Lun literature of Chinese Madhyamaka Buddhism: the Mahaprajnaparamita Sastra, the Dasabhyamivabhasa Sastra, the Madhyamaka Sastra, the Sada Sastra, and the Dvadasanikaya Sastra. In China, the groups which embrace Madhyamaka Buddhism are Si Lun Tsung, Prajna Tsung, Xing Tsung, in which the San Lun Tsung and Huayan Tsung are also included. 520. Mahayana. Northerner Mahayana is also called the major vehicle, the greater vehicle, one of the 2 great schools of Buddhism, Hinayana and Mahayana. The Mahayana arose in the 1st century BC. It is called great vehicle because its objective is the salvation of all beings. It opens the way of liberation to a great number of people, and indeed, expresses the intention to liberate all beings. One of the most critical in Mahayana is that it stresses the value on laypersons. It emphasizes that laypersons can also attain nirvana if they strive to free themselves from worldly bondages. Major Mahayana sects include Huayan, Thien, Zen and the Pure Land. It should be noted that Mahayana spread from India to Tibet, China, Korea and Vietnam. We must recognize that the Mahayana has contributed a great deal to Buddhist thought and culture. It has produced a wonderful path of bodhisattvas. Sakyamuni Buddha set an example by his own career that people could emulate. The goal of this career was enlightenment in Buddhahood, and the way was the way of the bodhisattva. The Third Council was held during the reign of Emperor Asoka in the 3rd century BC. There were already at least 18 schools, each with its own doctrines and disciplinary rules. Among them, 2 schools dominated the deliberations at the Third Council, an analytical school called Vibhajyavedans, and a school of realistic pluralism known as the Sarvastivadins. The council decided in favor of the analytical school, and it was the views of this school that were carried to Sri Lanka by Asoka's missionaries, led by his son Mahendra. There it became known as the Theravada. The adherents of the Sarvastivada mostly migrated to Kashmir in the northwest of India, where the school became known for its popularization of the path of the perfections of the Bodhisattva. However, another council, the Fourth Council, was held during the reign of King Kanishka in the 1st century AD in Kashmir. 2 more important schools emerged, the Vibhashikas and the Sautrantikas. These 2 differed on the authenticity of the Abhidharma, the Vibhashikas holding that the Abhidharma was taught by the Buddha, while the Sautrantikas held that it was not. By this time, Mahayana accounts tell us, a number of assemblies had been convened in order to compile the scriptures of the Mahayana tradition, which were already reputed to be vast in number. In the north and southwest of India as well as Nalanda and Magadha, the Mahayana was studied and taught. Many of the important texts of the Mahayana were believed to have been related by Maitreya, the future Buddha and other celestial bodhisattvas. The written texts of Mahayana as well as those of other schools began to appear about 500 years after the Buddha's nirvana. The earliest Mahayana sutras such as the Lotus Sutra and the Sutra of the Perfection of Wisdom are usually dated before the 1st century AD. The essence of the Mahayana Buddhism is the conception of compassion for all living beings. The Mahayana, with its profound philosophy, its universal compassion and its abundant use of skillful means, rapidly began to attract the majority of people, not only in India, but in the newly Buddhist lands of Central Asia. The origin of Mahayana may be traced to an earlier school known as Mahasangika, and earlier literary sources known as Mahayana Sutras. By the 1st century AD, the formation of the Mahayana Buddhism was virtually complete, and most of the major Mahayana sutras were in existence. Theoretically speaking, Mahayana Buddhism is divided into 2 systems of thought: the Madhyamaka and the Yogacara, a Sanskrit term for great vehicle. One of the 2 main strands of Indian Buddhism, the other being Nikaya Buddhism, referred to by Mahayana as Hinayana. Mahayana emphasizes the ideal of the Bodhisattva, which it contrasts with the Arat, the ideal of the Hinayana. It considers the Arat to be selfish, because the Arat path leads to nirvana for oneself alone, while the Bodhisattva strives to bring all sentient beings to salvation. The Mahayana is called Great Vehicle because its objective is the salvation of all beings. It opens the way of liberation to a great number of people, and indeed, expresses the intention to liberate all beings. One of the most critical in Mahayana is that it stresses the value on laypersons. It emphasizes that laypersons can also attain nirvana if they strive to free themselves from worldly bondages. Major Mahayana sects include Huayan, Thien, Zen and the Pure Land. It should be noted that Mahayana spread from India to Tibet, China, Korea and Vietnam. The origin of Mahayana may be traced to an earlier school known as Mahasangika and earlier literary sources known as Mahayana Sutras. The Mahayana Buddhism is also called the Supreme Vehicle, the highest vehicle, another name for Mahayana. The Mahayana is not only a highly developed and profound philosophy and psychology, it is also an accessible, dynamic vehicle for achievement of Buddhahood. The basic practice doctrine of Mahayana Buddhism is the cultivation of the 6 paramitas. Among them, the perfection of wisdom is the crown of the 6 perfections, for it is the penetrative, direct understanding of emptiness, will transform the practices of generosity, morality, patience, energy, and meditation into perfections. The role of the perfection of wisdom is unique among the 6 perfections, for it is in the light of the perfection of wisdom that we see the emptiness of the subject, object, as well as action of the other 5 perfections. For example, in the perfection of generosity, it is the perfection of wisdom that causes us to understand the emptiness of the subject of the action of giving or the giver, the emptiness of the object of giving or the recipient, and the emptiness of the gift. Similarly, in the perfections of morality, patience, energy, and meditation, it is through understanding the perfection of wisdom that one understands the purity or emptiness of the subject, object, and action present in every sphere of action. The practice of the 6 paramitas results in the accomplishment of the 2 accumulations of merit and knowledge. The perfection of generosity, morality, and patience result in the accumulation of merit, while those of meditation and wisdom result in the accumulation of knowledge. The perfection of energy is necessary in both accumulations of merit and knowledge. These 2 accumulations is very necessary for the cultivation and achievement of the Buddhahood. Besides, 4 infinite minds or 4 perfections of virtues may also be terms teleological or altruistic perfections. They are great vows of the enlightened ones with intention to free all sentient beings. These enlightened beings use all kinds of skillful means to save themselves, as well as to save others. An alternative understanding of the Buddhist goal began to emerge around the time of the Second Council, although its exact origins are not clear. This strand of Buddhism was later called Mahayana, or Great Vehicle, and today it is the dominant form of Buddhism in China, Japan, Korea, Mongolia, Tibet, and Vietnam. Unlike Theravada Buddhism, which is still a relatively unified tradition, the Mahayana constitutes a variety of different schools, such as in China, there were the 3 Sastra sect, based on the Madhyamaka Sastra, Dharmalaksana sect, Avadamsaka sect, based on the Buddha of Adamsaka Sutra, Vinaya or discipline sect, based on the Vinaya Pitaka, Satyasiddhi sect, based on the Satyasiddhi Sastra, Abhidharma Kosa sect, based on the Abhidharma Kosa Sastra. In Japan, the Japanese Tendai in Pure Land. However, the Mahayana never formed its own monastic code. Mahayana monks can practice alongside monks of other traditions, even though they may have different aspirations or visions of the path. The Mahayana accepts Gautama as a Buddha, but greatly expands the notion of Buddhahood by recognizing a rich pantheon of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, those whose essence is enlightenment. It also recognized scriptures that are not accepted by other forms of Buddhism as the word of the Buddha. Broadly speaking, the Mahayana differs from the Theravada in its representation of the final goal, the Buddhist ideal of the Arhat, who devotes himself to gaining insight, while Mahayana offers the path of the Bodhisattva as the ultimate accomplishment. Through the perfection of wisdom and compassion, the Bodhisattva teaches others so that they too may achieve enlightenment. The Mahayana considers other paths as inferior to that of the Bodhisattva, referring to them derogatively as Hinayana or lesser vehicle. A characteristic feature of Mahayana Buddhism is the notion that Buddhas or advanced bodhisattvas can, through their immense powers, create Buddha fields or pure land. These pure lands are seen as unique and blissful paradises, which are accessed by a favorable rebirth, following a life of devotion to the presiding Buddha. In a pure land, a being is able to hear and practice Dharma in conducive circumstances, enabling swift enlightenment. Of the many pure lands, the Pure Land of the West, ruled by the Buddha Amitabha, in Japanese, Amida, is one of the most important Buddhas in Mahayana Buddhism. After the Buddha's death, Buddhism was divided into many schools. The 2 main branches were Hinayana and Mahayana. Whoever seeks to become an Arhat belongs to the Hinayana, while whoever seeks to become a Buddha belongs to the Mahayana. Right after the Buddha's death, the school of Mahayana, attributed to the rise in India of the Madhyamaka, the school ascribed to Nagarjuna, and the Yoga, The rest of the sects belonged to the Hinayana. The Madhyamaka and Yoga were called San Luan and Dharmalaksana in China. In Japan, only Kosa and Satya Siddhi belonged to the Hinayana, the rest of other schools belonged to the Mahayana. The Mahayana teachings were given by the Buddha to an audience with strong interest in the Bodhisattva's path to Buddhahood. After the Buddha passing away, the Mahayana teachings weren't practiced publicly, but were passed down privately from teacher to student. According to the Buddhist legends, some Mahayana sutras were taken to another land to be cared for until conditions were right for their widespread propagation in our world. From the 1st century BC onwards, the Mahayana sutras began to appear publicly, and this way of practice became more widely known. The Mahayana has two methods of practice, Paramidayana and Vajrayana. Paramidayana is a general bodhisattva path found in the sutras, and it emphasizes the altruistic intention and the practice of the 6 far-reaching attitudes. Zen, Pure Land and others are included in the Paramidayana. Vajrayana contains the Theravada and Paramidayana methods, and adds the practice of meditating on various manifestations of the Buddhas or Buddhist meditational deities. Vajrayana techniques are found in teachings the Buddha gave called mantras. The development, or of the metaphysics of spirituality, happened around 2 centuries after the Buddha's nirvana led to the basic division between Hinayana and Mahayana. In the Hinayana there is, first of all, the old wisdom school, which, about 200 years after the Buddha's nirvana, split into 2 branches. In the east of India the Theravadins, who at present still dominate Ceylon, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, and in the west the Sarvastivadins, who flourished for 1,500 years, with Mathura, Gandhara and Kashmir as their centers. In addition, there were a number of other schools, of which almost no record is preserved. The Mahasangakas in Magadha and in the south round Amaravata, organized from 250 BC onward, the dissenters from the old wisdom school into a separate sect, which perished only when Buddhism was destroyed in India. From the Mahasangakas developed new doctrines. Its followers first called it the Bodhisattvayana, and, later on, the Mahayana or the Great Vehicle. On the contrary, the followers of the old wisdom school were occasionally referred to as Hinayana or the Lesser, the Inferior, or the Small Vehicle. There are no clear proportions between Hinayana and Mahayana followers in India at different times. Perhaps the Mahayanists began to outnumber the Hinayanists only after 800 AD. When Buddhism completely declined in India, and when it found its way to China, Korea, Japan, Mongolia, Tibet and Vietnam. Despite the division, both followers of the Mahayana and the Hinayana lived together in the same monastery for a very long time. They observed the same Vinaya rules, they recognized the same 5 precepts, practiced the same 4 noble truths and 8-fold noble path. The Mahayana Buddhism is the main doctrinal innovations of Buddhism. As concerns the goal, there is a shift from Arahant ideal to the Bodhisattva ideal. In Mahayana Buddhism, a new way of salvation is worked out, in which compassion ranks equal with wisdom. Before the development of the Mahayana Buddhism, skill in means was an entirely new concept, but after the development of the Mahayana, it became an essential method of salvation that utilized by bodhisattvas. It was placed even above wisdom, the highest virtue so far. Besides, Mahayana Buddhism introduced some coherent doctrines dealing with emptiness and suchness, and so on. Mahayanists believe that all dharmas are empty in the sense that each one is nothing in and by itself. Any dharma is therefore indistinguishable from any other dharma. In consequence, all dharmas are ultimately non-existent and the same. The above-mentioned emptiness can be called suchness when one takes each thing such as it is, without adding to or subtracting anything from it. There can be only one suchness, and the multiple world is only a construction of our imagination. If all is one and the same, then also the absolute will be identical with the relative, the unconditioned with the conditioned, nirvana with samsara. So, the Mahayanists conclude that true knowledge must rise above the duality of either subject and object, or affirmation and negation. Some reliable sources said that Mahayana Buddhism spread to Vietnam by Indian monks who traveled to the east by sea from the beginning of the 1st century AD, and later it entered China mainland. In the Great Tang persecution of 842 to 845 AD, Buddhism was severely repressed in China. All of the traditions except for Chan and Pure Land were essentially destroyed, although their influence remains and there is interest in them today. After 845, Chan and Pure Land became the principal Buddhist traditions, both of them studying the middle way and mind-only philosophies. Since the 16th century, Chan and Pure Land practices have been blended together in many Chinese monasteries. There are some other sources said that from China Mahayana spread to Vietnam beginning in the 2nd century AD and to Korea in the 4th century. Chan became prevalent in both Vietnam and Korea, although in Vietnam Pure Land and Theravada traditions became popular as well. In the 6th century, most Chinese Buddhist traditions reached Japan via Korea. In the 12th and 13th centuries, many new traditions proliferated in Japan. This occurred because people were bewildered by the vastness of the Buddha's teachings and sought a single effective practice to engage in. During this time, two Pure Land traditions branched off from the Thien Phuc tradition. Of these, the Jodo Shinshu, the true Pure Land sect, emphasized the family as the center of religious life. It began the custom of married monks who take vows and lead religious practices in temples. The temples are passed down from father to eldest son. Although Chan came to Japan as early as the 7th century, however, it became popular in the 12th. Many Zen traditions exist, but Rinzai and Soto became the most well-known. In the 13th century, the Nichiren tradition, based on the Lotus Sutra, appeared. Shingon, the Japanese tantric tradition, was also revitalized around this time. In the Meiji Restoration of 1868, the Japanese government decreed that all Buddhist clergy be allowed to marry. During the Japanese occupation of Korea in the early 20th century, non-celibate priesthood was introduced. But now most Korean Sangha follow the ordination vows of monks and nuns, which necessarily include celibacy. Post-West Japan has seen the arising of many small groups, each with its own way of practice. Some have integrated the pre-Buddhist Shinto beliefs into their system, others have adopted a Christian bent. Further studies should be accomplished to examine the teachings of these groups to determine if their interpretation is still faithful to the Buddha's teachings. From Japan in particular, Zen and Nichiren Shu have spread to Western countries. Zen has become very popular in the West, where lots of lay people attend meditation sessions and retreats. Some Zen centers have begun social welfare hospices to help the terminally ill or people with AIDS. The Buddhist texts brought to China by Indian missionaries and Chinese pilgrims weren't initially systematized. Over time, people became unsure how to resolve seeming discrepancies between sutras and how to practice the teachings in this vast amount of literature. Thus in the 7th century there were spontaneous attempts to organize the Buddhist teachings in China. Groups were formed around various monks, each of whom chose a particular sutra or group of sutras as the central point of their study and practice. These groups later evolved and became Buddhist traditions, each one passed down by a lineage of masters. 8 major traditions developed in China, as well as some minor ones. There were at least 8 principal traditions in many branches. First, San Lun, which followed the Madhyamaka, middle way, philosophical school of Indian Buddhism. Second, Fa Xiang, which followed the Yogacara, Cittamatrin or mind-only, philosophical school of Indian Buddhism. Third, Satyasiddhi, Changshi, a Theravada tradition. Fourth, Huayan, which was based on the Avatamsaka Sutra and dealt with an array of metaphysical concepts for contemplation. Fifth, Thien Phuc, which took the Lotus Sutra as foremost and presented a balance between meditation, philosophical study, and good deeds. Sixth, the third period school, San Shi Chiao, a method for purification based on strict observance of monastic vows and charitable actions. Seventh, Chan, Zen, which emphasizes meditation and the Lankavatara Sutra. Eighth, Pure Land, in which practitioners strove to be reborn in the Pure Land of Amitabha Buddha or Maitreya Buddha. As for the main texts, the Mahayana Buddhism has 12 kinds of Buddhist scriptures distinguished according to different styles of exposition, arranged in Pali scriptures. First, the Sutra, the Buddha's exposition of the Dharma in prose. These are short, medium, and long discourses expounded by the Buddha on various occasions, such as the Discourse on Blessings, Mangala Sutta, the Jewel Discourse, Ratana Sutta, Discourse on Goodwill, Metta Sutta, etc. Second, jaya or singing or songs, or verses which repeat the ideas already expressed in the preceding prose, in honor of the saints, such as the Sagatha Vagga of the Samyutta Nikaya. Third, gatha, or verses containing ideas not expressed in prose. Gatha includes verses found in the Way of Truth, Dhammapada, Psalms of the Brethren, Theragatha, and Psalms of the Sisters, Theragatha, etc. Fourth, Nidana, or narratives of the past which explain a person's present state. Fifth, Itivritaka or Itivataka, or narratives of past lives of the Buddha's disciples. Itivataka includes 112 discourses in the Khaddaka Nikaya. Sixth, Jataka, which includes 547 birth stories or narratives of past lives of the Buddha. Seventh, Adbhuta Dharma, or accounts of miracle or wonderful dharmas performed by the Buddha or a Deva. The Adbhuta Dharma includes a portion of the Majjhima Nikaya. Eighth, Avadana, or an exposition of the Dharma through allegories. Ninth, Upadesa or discussions of doctrine. 10th, Udana or sutra which spoken voluntarily without being asked. An exposition of the Dharma by the Buddha without awaiting questions or requests from his disciples, i.e. Amitabha Sutra, and a portion of the Khaddaka Nikaya. 11th, Vipulya or an extensive exposition of principles of truth. 12th, Vyakarana or Vyakarana, or prophecies by the Buddha regarding his disciples' attainment of Buddhahood. Arranged in Chinese scriptures. Principal sermons, metrical pieces, prophecies, verses, introductory parts, selections, quotations, story of the past, this is said, birthplaces, detailed explanations, wonderful dharmas, and explanation of meaning. According to the Thien Phuc school, Mahayana texts include the 5 chief Mahayana sutras: Avatamsaka Sutra, Mahasangata Sutra, Mahaprajna Sutra, Lotus Sutra, and Nirvana Sutra. The 5 Agamas: Dirghagama, Madhyamagama, Samyuktagama, Ekadarikagama, and Hidaka Nikaya, Ksudrakagama. According to Master Tzu, there are 6 works in the Dharmalaksana school. First, the Flower Adornment Sutra. Second, Sandhi Nirmakana Sutra, SKT. The chief text of the Dharmalaksana school, translated into Chinese by Xuanzang around the 5th century AD. Third, Sutra of the Virtues of the Manifestation of Tathagata. Fourth, Abhidharma Sutra. Fifth, the Lankavatara Sutra. Sixth, the Secret Adornment Sutra. There are also 9 Mahayana texts. Among the Mahayanist sutras, 9 texts are regarded as the most important. These are called the Vipulya Sutras: Astasahasrika Prajna Paramita, Siddharma Pandarika, Lankavatara, Lalitavastara, Suvarna Prabhasa, Gandavyuha, Tathagata Gihyaka, Samadhi Raja, and Dasabhumasvara. Besides, there are other Mahayana texts. Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, longer Sukhavativyuha Sutra or longer Amitabha Sutra, Amitardhyana Sutra, Sukhavati Vyuha, Ying Lo Ching, Radnakuta Sutra, Pradyutpanabhadasmukha Vastatasmadhi Sutra, Sutra on the 8 Awakenings of Great People, Prajnaparamidardaya Sutra, Pradamoksa, Badhikriyavatara Sutra, Jataka, Itvritaka, Sadharma Pandarika Sutra, Vimalakritinodisa Sutra, Bisaya Guru Vidyabrabhasabhavasavastara, Mahaparinirvana Sutra, Mahakaruna Dharani Sutra, Adhyarta Sadhaka Prajnaparamita Sutra, Mahavipulya Avatamsaka Sutra, Mahasamnapada Sutra or Mahasamgata Sutra, Ksitigarbhapranidhana Sutra, Maitravyakarana Sutra, Avatamsaka, Vajraketika Prajna Paramita. Sarva Tathagatatatvasambrahama Hayanabhismanahakapraya, Suvarnaprabhasa Sutra, the Sutra of Golden Light, Lankavatara Sutra, Suringama Sutra, Liut Su Tashi Fa Pao Tan Ching, Sutra on Questions of King Milinda, Samitra Khandapradīpa Sutra, Kandratirdirakaparipurka Sutra, Karunakaraja Prajnaparamita Sutra, Parinirvana Sutra, Brahmahala, Brahma Net Sutra, Brahmahala Bodhisattva Precept Sutra, Dharmapada, Dhammamapada, the Anisha Vijaja Dharani Sutra, Lalita Vistara Sutra, Vidakarita, Vidpulya, Amitardhyana Sutra, Sramala Sutra, Dasabhumika Sutra, Astasahasrika Prajnaparamita Sutra, Sutra in 42 sections, Upasakasila Sutra, Manjusriparipurka, Wonderful and Marvelous Dharmas, Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, Sutra of Infinite Meaning, Sukhavadavyuha Sutra, and the Ulambana Sutra. This is the end of this video. As you already know, Buddha emphasized the importance of generosity supporting the spread of the Dharma for spiritual growth. We can cultivate this virtue in our digital age. Now I need your help spreading the Buddha teaching further by subscribing, liking, and sharing our channel. You're supporting the dissemination of valuable teachings, much like this Sangha was supported in the past. Your engagement accumulates positive karma for you and helps make the Dharma accessible to a wider audience, a meritorious act indeed. Let's do this with pure intentions, free from attachment and selfishness, fostering a sense of community and supporting our own spiritual journey. These principles, rooted in Buddhist ethics, continue to guide us. You will receive great blessings for supporting the propagation of Buddha's teachings in a very simple way. By subscribing, liking, and sharing to help spreading the Buddha teaching to all human beings. Wishing you and your family always have a peaceful and happy life.